when we go to Genesis 6, the first four verses, so 6, 1 to 4, and like you said, most Bibles don't translate this word Nephilim. Can we please first start with dissecting what the word means? I heard at least two different camps. One would say that Nephilim are giants and that's it. But I also heard another view which would say, well, giants were Nephilim, but there are also other beings like cryptids, and we can put all sorts of creepy and weird creatures that will belong in this category of Nephilim. So can we please first start with dissecting the word? What did your research led you to?
Sure. Okay, that's a good place to start. And I think what I'll do to begin is to just read the biblical text first, so that we're all on the same page. Because sometimes we think we remember what something says, and when we go back and read it, we go, "Oh, actually, that was a bit different in my head." So I'm going to read Genesis 6, 1 to 4. And I'm going to use the King James version because I think they do a pretty good job here. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Okay, so that's the first four verses. I'm hoping you don't hear my dog barking in the background. He's going off. Anyway, um, that is one of only a handful of translations that will actually give you the word giants rather than Nephilim. And it was when I first saw that I thought, wait a minute, giants aren't real, are they? What is this? Because when somebody says to me, giants, as a young person, I'm thinking, Jack and the Beanstalk, right? I'm thinking Lord of the Rings, rock giants and, uh, you know, uh, even Transformers and things like that. Like, they're big and they're powerful, and they have all sorts of cool weapons and technology and magic and all these kind of things. But all those things uh, have some degree of overlap with the biblical concept of giants. But the one thing that we miss, I guess, is this idea of immense towering size. Like when someone says giant, we should be looking toward the clouds and see these enormous people, uh, you know upwards of 30 feet tall or something. And so when I saw that in the Bible, I was like, that can't be right. Like, no, really? And I got to get to the bottom of this. The more I read the Bible, the more I realized that we're not talking about that scale of size. You know, yeah, they're called giants because they're big people, but I think we can come down to the realm of, you know, the biggest people that we might commonly see today in our world would fit into that category. So, if you know somebody who is, close to 7 feet tall, and you think about a person that size, I think that's what we're really talking about here. So it helps to have that in perspective because that's all the evidence we get from the Bible. There's nothing in the Bible that actually says that they were much bigger than that. So I think that's a helpful frame of reference. But the real issue is, how did people in biblical times actually think about these people, and how did they get this idea of who they are and where they came from and all the rest of it? because we only have those 4 verses there in Genesis, and it really doesn't elaborate much on that at all. And there seems to be an awful lot of tradition built up around these ideas that come from somewhere, and later authors and uh, church fathers and whatnot have been talking about this for centuries, and there are stories built up around this little uh, nugget of truth from the Bible here, which expand on it immensely. And the understanding of who these people are varies from one person to the next, and some take it very literally and very woodenly, and others take it in a highly symbolic fashion where they're just kind of extracting principles from it and not really concerned with the physical reality. So uh, the challenge is trying to work out for yourself how that all works, how it fits, and what is the truth that the biblical authors are really trying to bring out for us. So, getting into that word Nephilim, it's a tricky one because it only appears 3 times in the whole Bible. 2 of those are in the same verse. So, there's really only 2 spots where the Nephilim are mentioned. You have one here in Genesis 6, you have another one in Numbers chapter 13. And the one in Numbers is telling because you get some idea of um, this notion that they are really quite large and fearsome. And a lot of people will try and take it very literally and say, "Oh, well, the spies, yeah, who came back from Canaan said that they were like grasshoppers in their sight." And so we get very mathematical. Okay, well, a grasshopper is maybe 2 inches tall, and you know, if they're the size of a normal person in comparison, then, these giants would have to be, hundreds and hundreds of feet tall. They must be really immense. I don't think that's how it works. People don't really talk like that. I mean, you just you don't hear people say things like that and intend for a real, literal, scientific correspondence. It's just, figures of speech. The way people talk and the way people write, they will use imagery to convey the point, and it's not intended to be literal. Okay, we need to stop looking at the Bible like it's a science book. Now, back in Genesis 4, there is the line of Cain, and the idea that Cain's line, who was sort of emblematic of um, human evil in the world in this pre-flood time, they somehow uh, come up with all this technology. They become the innovators of music and weaponry and all kinds of things which are viewed quite negatively in certain contexts in the Bible. I mean, music doesn't sound that bad. I guess it's what you do with it, right? It's like everything. Any technology can be applied to something good or can be applied to something bad. And the point in these early chapters of Genesis is on the corruption of humanity and the way that we, through our sinful desires and our selfishness and our desire for self gratification and self glorification, have used technology uh, negatively to pursue our own interests. And then you get into later works like First Enoch, and that author, he's putting all these things together. He's like, where all this stuff came from? He says, those fallen angels, they came down and mingled with the women, and they taught things that people weren't supposed to know. And in their relations with these women, they gave birth to these giants, right? Because you have these supernatural entities taking on a bodily form, and the result of that union is something semi divine. And so that's the understanding of the Nephilim that carries through into the New Testament period and was prevalent for a very long time. I think we could reasonably say, even before First Enoch was written, I mean, that's just when it gets put on paper. But I mean, if you want to arbitrarily say that we have documentary evidence of this worldview uh, developing in, say, the third century BC and into the fourth century AD, well into the establishment of the church, that was the dominant paradigm and the understanding of the Nephilim that people just accepted was the normal view, um, that there was this supernatural element at work in the creation of these beings who were bent on destruction and dominating the world and basically held humanity to be their enemies and their subjects to be subjugated and abused. So you can see how in the biblical narrative, the people that God created were being uh, destroyed by the things that they had embraced to try to make themselves great. You know, they were trying to give themselves the power of God, and they invited these relationships because they thought it would be good for their families, for their progeny. They wanted the successive generations to have these powers and these technologies that the sons of God uh, could deliver. And having taken advantage of that, they then found that it was to their destruction. And because they were participating willingly in that and had forsaken their creator, the Lord God, that's really the reason that the flood was allowed to happen, was because these people had made a decision to walk away from allegiance to Yahweh the Most High. So this is a matter of allegiance rather than just a case of, well, they did something bad, so, God's going to kill them. That view of the Nephilim and who they were started to be challenged uh, as early as the second century, but didn't really take hold uh, up till late in the fourth century when uh, people began to push back against this idea that the sons of God could have anything to do with God Himself. Uh, in the wake of the advent of Christianity and the origin of the church, and of course, everyone's going around saying that Jesus is the Son of God. Uh, if you're a Jew and you've rejected Jesus as Messiah, you don't want to hear that. There were uh, various rebellions and uprisings uh, in Judea where people got up and claimed to be Messiah. They were causing all sorts of problems. You had the Bar Kokhba revolt in the second century. Um, Eventually, the Jewish people got sick of hearing all this stuff and just decided they were going to stamp it out. And that actually caused a substantial doctrinal revision for the Jewish people, which was unprecedented. And they basically uh, discarded the idea that Yahweh himself could be um, interacted with as an incarnate form on the earth, even though that's well documented through the Old Testament. The idea that there was a second Yahweh figure who could be embodied and could be interacted with on the earth. So getting rid of that and talking about God in terms of this purely immaterial nature that can't interact with the world, and all that kind of separated Jesus from God and had the effect of um, basically isolating um, Christianity from the mainstream Jewish faith, because Christianity was just kind of an offshoot of Judaism at first, and these things began to separate, get further apart. The other thing that happened was that politically, it made sense for the Romans to begin to develop these ideas that the church was separate uh, to Judaism, and there was also a development of ideas where these sons of God were seen as righteous people, and it's so full of logical errors, but people embraced it because they didn't like the alternative, the supernatural idea. Because if you can have a son of God doing something that's bad, then what does that say about Jesus? We don't like the idea that Jesus could have been the same kind of thing as one of these sons of God who created the Nephilim, and they're not. There's a world of distinction there, but if you're not prepared to sit down and sort of tease out the differences and see how they are distinct and how Jesus is unique as the the unbegotten Son of God, or sorry, the only begotten Son of God, should I say, uncreated is what I meant. Uh, yeah, if you're not following those things carefully and you just kind of throw all your eggs in the same basket, then you're going to ditch that idea, because you don't want to see Jesus as one of these rebellious creatures that abandoned heaven to come to earth to proliferate evil among humanity. And over the centuries that followed, uh, the church kind of just left that whole idea behind, and it sort of became a bit of a taboo thing that people didn't talk about anymore. And yeah, it's only when we get to more recent years, in particular the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, where we suddenly have so much manuscript evidence that the supernatural worldview of ancient Israel uh, was actually prevalent. It was the majority view, and it was the basis for a lot of the doctrine that we find established in the New Testament. And things that we wondered about for a long time start to make a lot more sense. Things like in Peter's letters, where he talks about uh, Christ preaching to the rebellious spirits in prison, things like that. I mean, if you don't have First Enoch in your library, so to speak, things that you're culturally aware of, those things just don't make any sense. And so when I wrote my book, I was just like, we need to get all this stuff together, give people a sense of what the worldview of the biblical authors actually was and what that means for us.